Surprised that the new version of the Labor Party has no particular concern about debt at all.
Question number 2, Metiria Turei.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister and asks, does he stand by his statement in relation to the government's welfare reforms announced yesterday that, quote, there are plenty of jobs out there for people if they look really hard? If so, why?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, yes, I stand by my full statement, which was, it's worth pointing out that in all of these changes we are making, it's about people. If they can be work ready. If they don't get a job, if there isn't a job out there for them, then nothing changes in terms of their entitlement. But there are plenty of jobs out there for people if they look really hard. Now, not obviously for every single person, but people do find work and the economy is constantly creating new jobs.
Metiria Turei.
Why is his government intent on forcing single parents with little babies as young as 12 months old to abandon their children and compete with the 150,000 New Zealanders who are already desperately looking for work?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, firstly I think it's worth pointing out what the government's proposed changes are when it comes to women on the DPB, and that is a full-time work testing when the youngest child is 14. It's a part-time work testing when the youngest child is 5. The only requirements for a mother to go back to work when the youngest child is 1 would be in the event that the child is born while the mother is already on the DPB, of which last year there were over 4,000. Why do we think it's better for them to go to work? Well, if you look at the system that has been in place now through a number of governments, that system supports higher levels of income for people in work. Let's take somebody who works 20 hours a week and leaves the DPB. They get the minimum family tax credit, which is $22,204 a year. On top of that, they get the in-work tax credit, which is $3,120 a year, all of which adds up to about $25,300 a year for 20 hours. The DPB for that person would be $15,000. Their household would be considerably better off. This government's also investing $130 million in support for those mothers, whether it's in retraining or whether it's in childcare facilities.
Metiria Turei.
What kind of guarantee can the Prime Minister give to parents who are forced to abandon their children under the work testing regime in terms of efficient quality childcare, given the government's $400 million cuts to early childhood education?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the member's made a number of mistakes in her question, so let me take this moment to correct her. For a start off, when National became the government at the end of 2008, expenditure in early childhood education in this country was approximately $800 million a year. This year, it's $1.4 billion. That's a $600 million a year increase. Mr. Speaker, I think it's also worth pointing out that a large proportion of New Zealand women with children do go to work. And they go to work and rely on the childcare facilities that are in place right across the country. And in fact, I don't think it's right or fair to accuse those women of abandoning their children. What they are doing is trying to support their home.
Metiria Turei.
Has the Prime Minister looked at the last MSD analysis of the last work testing regime that showed that young children were put at risk of being abandoned, left alone at home, left alone with other children, or left in the hands of unsuitable carers? And what guarantee can he give that children will not be put in that situation under the current work testing regime?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier, the government is investing an enormous amount of money in childcare facilities and supporting, amongst other things, 23 hours and a whole bunch of other systems which enable people to actually go to work. If the member is making the case that for this specific group, which is quite small in nature, that's abandonment, then the member is making the case that every New Zealand mother or father is abandoning their child when they go to childcare, and frankly, if that's the case, the member is speaking rubbish.
Jacinda Ardern.
Supplementary to the Prime Minister. Does he plan to evaluate his government's job summit in light of the National Employment Indicator figures released today, which show there are fewer jobs now than when the summit was held, and almost 40,000 fewer jobs since he took office.
The Right Honourable Prime
Mr. Speaker,
Minister.
I don't have those. I don't have those numbers to hand. But let me take the opportunity to update the member if she is concerned about whether there are jobs for people to go to. The ANZ jobs report for January showed there were jobs on offer in every region of this country. There were 30,000 jobs there. If you go and have a look at work and income, they receive 1,300 to 1,500 vacancies a week. On average, they have 3,500 jobs on offer. Last year, 80,000 people went off a benefit into work. And in the last 2 years under the Household Labour Force Survey...
Order. The Right Honourable Winston Peters.
That's the Prime Minister. Where are the...
Order. Point of order, the Honourable Cherry Brown.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not aware that the Prime Minister said anything objectionable in his answer. He was answering a question very factually, which you have repeatedly required ministers to do.
Order.
He certainly wasn't a long time on his answer.
The Honourable Leader of the House doesn't need to make that interjection. The Prime Minister, in opening his answers, he didn't actually have the information, the figures the member was referring to in her question, and went on to offer perfectly reasonable information he did have, and that's why I allowed it to go on for some time. But there's a limit to how long an answer that's not directly answering the question should go on. That's why I intervened. The Honourable Cherry Brown.
Mr. Speaker, I think the Prime Minister was being polite because the member was misleading the House with that question.
Now, order. Order. Now, the Honourable Leader of the House knows that he must not make that kind of allegation under a point of order. Members are honourable members, and the figures can be disputed by the Minister answering, but no other member under a point of order can question the accuracy of a member of what a member in this House says. Supplementary question, the right point of order, the Honourable Trevor Mallett.
Mr. Speaker, I think we do need to go a bit further. The member did source her quote as being from the National Employment Indicators.
Order. No, we're not going to debate this matter by way of point of order. That is totally out of order. We've gone to this trouble because it was a spurious point of order raised by the Honourable Leader of the House, and we're not going to go any further down that path. The Right Honourable Winston Peters.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Remembering his May 2010, 170,000 new jobs created by 2015, that's 34,000 a year. Where then are all these new jobs when less than 14,000 were created in 2011 according to Stats New Zealand? Or was he talking about Australia?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if one looks at the Household Labour Force Survey alone, 62,000 new jobs were created over the last 2 years. As I said, there are 30,000 jobs currently in the ANZ survey on offer at the moment. If one looks at the number of people that went off benefits into work last year, they were 80,000.
Point of order, the Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Second, I specifically referred him to the latest figures from Stats New Zealand of 13,945. That's dramatically less than 34,000 a year. And he's quoting from a whole lot of other pieces of paper, none of which are to do with Stats New Zealand.
Well, speaking of the point of order, the Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Household Labour Force Survey is put together by Stats New Zealand.
Order.
Order. I'll hear the Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Mr.
I'm not sure.
Mr. Speaker, the Stats New Zealand reported that 13,945 to be precise.
Order. Order. We're not going to debate this matter further by way of point of order. The member asked a question where he inserted what he alleged to be information from Statistics New Zealand. The Prime Minister answered the question, likewise using information from Statistics New Zealand. And that is the end of the matter. There is nothing further to pursue by way of points of order. Point of order, the Right Honourable Winston Peters.
I seek to table those
No, we don't
papers.
table stuff that's readily available to members via Stats New Zealand. Metiria Turei, supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How does the Prime Minister reconcile the advice of his Chief Science Advisor, Sir Peter Gluckman, that early and intensive support for vulnerable children and their families is critical for their long-term success, with his policy of coercion forcing sole parents into low-paid, insecure work and thereby abandoning their children to the care of others?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let's take the simple example I gave the member earlier. So that is somebody who goes into 20 hours work a week or more. Because of the structure of working for families, that means that their income in their household is $25,000 a year minimum, and the person on the DPB would be getting $15,000. Now, if you add to that the fact that the government is providing enormous support around these families and individuals in terms of retraining and help, I personally think it's actually helping those families to give them the assistance, to give them the training, to give them the childcare facilities, and actually to make sure that they get an opportunity to fulfil their lives. And if anyone thinks that that is going to come through a lifetime on welfare, then they should go all the way back to the architect of the welfare system, Michael Joseph Savage, whose exact words were, "Welfare will never be an armchair ride to prosperity."
Supplementary.
The Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Could the Prime Minister tell the country which set of figures does he believe? The 13,945 created in 2011 according to Stats New Zealand, or the Household Labour Force survey that he says reported 63,000 new jobs being created over the last 2 years? Which of those two figures does he expect the country to believe?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, for a start, I said 62,000, and I'm not questioning the member on the other. I'm simply saying the Household Labour Force survey quite clearly shows that 62,000 jobs were created over the last 2 years.
Metiria Turei.
Can the Prime Minister assure this House that his work testing regime of sole parents of very young babies, as young as 12 months, will not put a single child at risk of harm or abuse or neglect?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, what I can say is, firstly, it's important to understand that anybody that is required under the new system to be available for work is literally that, needs to be available for work. If there isn't a job, then there are no changes to their benefit entitlements. Secondly, no one can ever have 100% confidence in the system, because from Kaitaia to Bluff, there are many households who rely on the quality of early childhood facilities or caregivers or others to support them. And I think we all know the system isn't perfect, but there's no reason to believe it would be any different for those potentially up to 4,000 mothers than it is for the hundreds of thousands of others across the country that rely on the system.
Metiria Turei.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Will the Prime Minister commit to abandoning the work testing regime if there is any evidence that shows that any child, even one child, is harmed as a result of the coercion of sole parents into work?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, what I will give a commitment to is ensuring that, as far as government can, that the policies and legislation that this government is responsible for does the best to protect every New Zealand child. That is not something that should be applied to one group of New Zealand parents and not to others. That's my expectation as Prime Minister of every parent in this country. But for the members to argue that somehow the 4,800 mothers, largely teenage mothers, who last year had another baby on the DPB are somehow different to the expectations the government would have for any other mother or father in the country is just plain wrong.
Order.
Point of order, Metiria Turei.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I seek leave to table two documents. The first is the Ministry of Social Development's 2001 evaluation of the work testing regime from the 1999 reforms showing that children were put at risk.
Leave us to table that document. Is there any objection? There is no objection.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Yep.
My apologies, I just want to get some clarification. I was going to seek leave to table a document from the Ministry of Social Development showing benefit numbers. Is that a publicly available document under the rules such that it would not be able to be tabled?
Well, if it's Ministry of Social Development, if it's a document that's readily available, yeah, we don't waste time in the House on that. But the first document, the member sought leave has been granted. Question number 3, David, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Prime Minister, does he have confidence in all his ministers?
The Right Honourable Prime
Minister.
Minister.
Yes.